Okay, so we could just give folks one more minute and then get started.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Courtney Henderson. I work with the Office of Immigrant Affairs. I want to take this time to introduce our
Meu
interpreter.
nome é Courtney Cortes, eu trabalho com a cidade de Somerville.
Roseanne, not
Oh,
quite yet.
sorry.
No, you're okay.
Oh.
Not quite yet. But you're right on track. I want to take the time to introduce our interpreters for this evening. We have Spanish interpretation as well as Portuguese for those listening in. Roseanne, go ahead, since you're already eager, introduce yourself to everyone.
Ok, boa noite, meu nome é Rosane Rose, eu sou intérprete de português e obrigada a todos por estarem aqui hoje à noite.
Thank you. And then Kenya, who will be providing Spanish interpretation.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Kenia Tennant, interpretador en español para asistirles.
Thank you. I'm going to take some time to go over some instructions on how to get into the interpretation rooms. I will share my screen shortly. So for those who are joining in and needing interpretation, here are the instructions on how to access that here on your computer. I will also scroll down so that the instructions are also in another language. So you're going to scroll down and find the button for interpretation, which is a little globe, and then you'll select the language that you're needing for this evening. I do ask that you wait before you do that because we have not kicked that off just yet. For those that are joining in on your phone, you will be able to access this function by clicking the three dots below and then finding the language by hitting your language interpretation button. And now I will pass this over to Kenya to provide the instructions in Spanish.
You just want me to read it?
Or you can summarize what I've said.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
No, you're fine.
Okay, entonces esto que estoy mostrando acá es mostrándole de la forma que ustedes van a poder tener asistencia con el interpretador de su lengua. Más adelante va a haber un globito donde usted le va a hacer clic y entonces va a entrar a la sala donde va a ver la interpretación del lenguaje propio.
And then Roseanne.
Se você precisar de interpretação, hoje teremos interpretação em português. Para interpretar em um computador, você vai clicar no símbolo de um globo no canto inferior de sua tela. Selecione a opção para o idioma que você fala. Já a interpretação no celular, você clica nos três pontinhos do canto inferior direito da sua tela.
Awesome. Okay. So now I will start the interpretation and then kick it off to Megan and Mike for the workshop.
Thanks so much. We'll just give people a second to switch over.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Do I need to also click the globe? I just hit the Spanish. Is that okay?
Yes, that's
Okay.
Okay, so should we get started?
yep. You have the floor, Mike.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Courtney. Good evening, everyone. We're really excited to have you here tonight for our first ever Budget 101 workshop for residents of Somerville. I know there's a lot of meetings going on tonight, so I'm told, in Somerville, but you chose to be here with us, so we're very thankful for that.
Buenas noches a todos. Gracias por participar. Can you hear me?
We can hear you,
Oh.
yes. So I think you
sorry.
might have to switch over.
Oh, I don't know what I did. I'm so sorry. Just 1 second.
That's okay.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Mm. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm gonna text you and troubleshoot that on that end.
Okay.
We can take a second. Stand by, everyone. We'll just resolve that and then
Thank you.
get going again.
Un momentito, por favor. Vamos a arreglar esto y vamos a proceder.
Okay, it should work now if you go over to the Spanish channel. Yes,
Okay, so seems like we're all set.
it looks like it.
Fantastic. Thanks again. So we have two staff here tonight, myself on the call, as well as our budget analyst, Megan Huckenpaller. My name is Mike Mastroboni. My position in the city is budget director. I've been working in Somerville since 2014. My responsibility is leading the development of the operating budget and the capital budget, as well as working closely with residents and the city council on all things budget. And we also have Megan here. Megan, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hello, folks. My name is Megan Huckenpaller. I'm the budget analyst working for Mike. I am the lead on participatory budgeting, as well as supporting Mike in the operating budget and all else related to finance. I've been with the city a little over a year now, and this will be my second budget.
And I want to take a minute to thank the staff who helped us not only develop these presentation materials, but the technology. Courtney from communications, everyone from communications, our two interpreters tonight, as well as our colleagues from the Office of Immigrant Affairs who helped us in preparing this tonight. So tonight we'll be covering a few topics. We'll probably have about 20 or 30 minutes of presentation where we'll cover the basics, starting from scratch with municipal budgeting, an overview, kind of getting into Somerville's budget, a little bit about how our budget has changed over time. And then I'll pass it off to Megan, who is going to talk about how the city develops the budget, resources for you as residents to learn more, to get involved, stay involved. And then at the end, in our second number 5, we'll have a question and answer session where you can ask us questions about how the budget's developed, how to read the budget, how to find items, as well as a listening session where if you have comments you'd like to make here or through email, we want to give you that opportunity to share that with us. So first, the basics. Where do we start with budgets in municipal government? Our budget in Somerville serves a lot of purposes. It's a financial plan, it's a policy document, it's a values document. It helps guide our operations as a city. And it also serves as a device, as a document for communication to residents to keep folks up to date on what the city is doing. And additionally, it's a performance management tool that helps the city to keep tabs on what we expect to do in the coming year and what progress we expect to make on those goals. We really come at this from a few angles. First, with our values from Mayor Ballantyne, making sure that our process is inclusive of all city departments, that the mayor, our residents, and the city council are all partners, all have a role to play in budget development and budget approval. We also think very, very carefully about how our decisions tie back to our financial health as a city. And we also think about budgeting as a way to encourage effective government as we focus on the most important services that we deliver for our residents. So getting a little bit deeper, when people talk about the budget in Somerville, almost always what they're referring to is that gray box on the left side. It's called the general fund. That's our main operating fund. On one side, you have revenues coming in, things like taxes, whether it's property tax or meals tax, local receipts, which are fees and permits and things like that, and then state aid, which is money we get from the Commonwealth. On the other side of that budget, expenditures, staffing, supplies and services, and then some other kind of different items like special items and capital. We'll get into a little bit more about what those are. But the city also has other parts of our budget, which include things like revolving funds, which are programs that are funded through user fee, through fees. So for example, if you have a child that goes to tot time with the recreation department, you pay to join that program, and then that money goes to pay for that program. We also have enterprise funds. If you are a homeowner in Somerville, you're familiar with your water and sewer bills. And these are basically business type funds, which have their own separate accounting system, their own separate financial reporting system, sort of a separate part of the budget. And then there's also special revenue funds, which really are things like grants or the Community Preservation Act, which have revenue from a specific source that is supposed to be used, that must be used on specific items. Each year, the city develops a budget that and submits to the city council the level of appropriation required to meet the needs of the community. And so we propose a budget that meets that goal. Excuse me. So what are the parts of the budget? If you've ever watched a budget hearing, you're familiar with these 4 categories, but we break down our budget on the expenditure side into these 4 categories. Personal services is the cost to pay employees of the city. This includes things like salaries and wages, benefits, overtime, things like that. If a union contract has specific benefits, we budget that in personal services. Ordinary maintenance is really supplies and third-party services So for example, on the supply side, that could be the purchase of cement in DPW to pay for reconstructing a sidewalk. On the third-party services side, sometimes we don't have the ability with our staff to do highly technical analysis. So we might hire an engineer to help us draft a work plan for a building upgrade or something like that. Special items is a place where we can budget a program separately from the other departmental budgets. An example of this is the Mayor's Summer Jobs Program. Students basically have internships with different departments all over the city, but we budget that whole program as a special item in the mayor's office. So it's sort of a unique situation that we have there. And then lastly, capital outlay for larger items like repairs to buildings, repairs to building systems, the purchase of vehicles, sort of larger, bigger ticket items like that. A few important concepts that I'll go over briefly. Massachusetts has a pretty restrictive financial framework compared to other states. So oftentimes the budget and the finance teams work to kind of interpret that framework that we get from the state. You know, on the other side of that coin, we're often the ones working to figure out creative solutions to problems that departments have. Second, we're required to have a balanced budget. Our revenues must meet our expenditures. We cannot deficit spend as a city, so any budget that is proposed must be balanced. Third, there's been a lot of talk, a lot of discussion recently with the recently submitted capital plan about where the capital plan fits into the operating budget. The short version is that there are two separate sort of work products, but the capital plan feeds into the operating budget. The more we are spending on the capital plan, the more that impacts the operating budget. And then last, transparency and accountability. You know, it's our responsibility as an administration to present goals with the budget that tie directly with the funding that is being requested in that budget. So moving on, let's get into Somerville's budget. What makes it up? How do I read it? Let's get into some of the components. This is a picture of the revenue coming into the city for the current fiscal year that we're in, which is fiscal year 2023. You'll notice that the majority of our revenue comes from taxation. Again, that includes property taxes, meals taxes, vehicle excise tax, things like that. So that makes up 232, almost 233 million out of our $309 million of revenue. Next down the list is state aid, which is money we get from the Commonwealth. The majority of that is what's called unrestricted general government aid, which is basically just money that's shared with cities and towns. And the other one is Chapter 70 school aid. Even further down, you have local receipts, which are things like permits, building permits, fees, fines. If you register your dog or have a wedding in Somerville, those are considered when you pay that fee for that paperwork, that goes into local receipts. And then lastly, we have a couple other miscellaneous types of categories. So this is the revenue side. On the expenditure side, something that I really like to share is this this breakdown of how we spend our money based on those four categories that I was talking about previously: personal services, ordinary maintenance, capital outlay, and special items. When you browse the budget, we focus a lot on the program costs that we develop each year. But the reality is that our staff are the bulk of our costs. The bulk of the lion's share of our expenditures are on personal services, things like salaries, overtime, benefits, health insurance, things like that. We are, as a city, it's our job to solve problems in Somerville, and the staff are how we achieve that. Another way to look at the expenditures is by what I would call purpose. These are groupings of departments that kind of roll up to clusters. You can see things like public works. We have a bunch of divisions within public works, but all in all, we spend about $34 million of that. What you can see here is when you look at the allocation of how we spend our funds, you notice the largest proportion of our budget is spent on the Somerville Public Schools, almost $93 million. Nearly a third of the budget goes to the schools, and part of that is Mayor Ballantyne in last year's budget requested a 10% increase in schools, which is actually the highest ever. So, that actually takes up nearly a third of our budget. Okay, so now you know a little bit about the very basics of budgeting in Somerville. How could you learn more? Megan's going to go over this in depth, but when you go to somervillema.gov/budget, you see the budget broken down in a couple different ways. You've got the introduction, which has a citywide perspective, as well as information from the mayor. The bulk of the budget website is departmental pages, which include a line-by-line spending plan. It includes goals. It includes data to support that. And then some extra information at the back in the form of appendices and the capital investment plan, where you can find out more about the staffing that the city has. You can find out more about financial policies and other items like that. So, your first step should always be going to www.somervillema.gov/budget to start browsing. So what challenges and opportunities do we have as we develop budgets in Somerville? There's several financial challenges that cities in Massachusetts are facing. We're not unique in a number of these, a couple of these. We do have limited revenue opportunities. And what I mean by that is, some states allow their cities and towns to get creative with how they generate revenue. That's not the case in Massachusetts. And we'll get into that in just a moment. Another challenge that we're facing is reduced state aid. In fiscal year 2007, that's about almost 15 years ago, we were receiving $43 million in net state aid from the Commonwealth. And what I mean by that is all of the funds they give us minus all the funds that we pay for things like the MBTA. So 15 years ago, we were receiving $43 million in net state aid. Now, 15 years later, we receive $37 million. So we're actually still receiving less now than we did in 2006. So that's a challenge that we face. And then a last one is ambitious planning. I think residents want more services from Somerville government. They want more investment. And we've done is what I've referred to as multiple generational projects all at the same time. The city has redeveloped Assembly Square. The city has nearly completed a new Somerville High School. The city has completed a huge infrastructure project on Somerville Ave and the Poplar Street Pump Station, which I think we're up against that meeting tonight. So there's an ambitious agenda of projects that residents want Somerville city government to complete. And that's an opportunity and a challenge, I guess you could say. But our revenue, the proportion of our revenue has changed drastically since that year I was referring to before, fiscal year 2007. In 2007, about half of our revenue came from property tax. and a third came from state aid. And you can see in the 15 years since, the proportion of property of our revenue that comes from property tax has grown by 16%, and the proportion of state aid has gone down. And you can see local receipts, basically the same proportion. So this is the kind of challenge that we are faced with as a city. And it's something that I know some of our city councilors are very passionate about, this reduction in state aid. We also have a lot of opportunities in Somerville. The city has been able to grow its tax base by supporting development in the residential, the commercial, lab sector. Assembly Square, Union Square, to some extent Boynton Yards in recent years, have all helped to expand the tax base in order to grow our budget. And as you know, money turns into services, so we're able to harness that investment. We were also in a really good financial position currently because we've spent nearly 2 decades trying to get there. We have healthy reserves right now, and we've been able to use those for projects in support of residents. And then finally, constituents such as folks here, folks across the city are supportive of investments in the areas that we've discussed, things like infrastructure, social services, the schools, housing stability, just to name a few. That's an opportunity that folks are pushing us to do more and giving us the ability to make that a reality. And so when I say we have challenges in funding, challenges in the restrictive environment of Massachusetts, and that we've also got the strong investment, this is what it looks like. The past 5 years, we've added record property value growth, which allows the city to fund new initiatives, new programs, solve new problems. And you can see that the big change over the last 5 years is that commercial growth that we've seen really kickstart the economic engine of the city. So what that all enables us to do is tackle these difficult problems head on. Looking at the organization chart from, it's less important about what the actual departments are, but looking at the organization chart from 2013 to 2023 was really not that long ago, only a decade. Since then, we've added departments for fields maintenance, racial and social justice, housing stability, the Somerviva Office of Immigrant Affairs, public space and urban forestry and mobility were separated to become 2 standalone departments, as well as in public works, the buildings division and the grounds division each became their own departments. These are examples of kind of how the city operations have grown to meet modern needs. So you've learned a little bit about the basics. You've learned about kind of the result of the budget. Megan's now going to take us through budget development and then how you can get involved in budgeting in Somerville.
Thank you, Mike. So this section is about budget development and what does the work look like to bring a budget together. As a reminder, we have lots of inputs going into the budget that happen year-round, including our strategic plans, informing our community values. We saw the Summer Vision 2040 plan, the Climate Forward plan, plans related to bicycle networks, and other traffic-related plans such as Vision Zero Somerville. We see our capital plan, community input from residents, as well as the council priorities. And the output of the budget, as we see when it's time to look at the next fiscal year, performance measurement as seen through metrics and goals stated by departments, and then accounting and reporting. So we have reports on the finance website that will show the spend as we progress throughout the fiscal year, as well as reporting that goes to state and other agencies. As a reminder, one of the laws of Massachusetts that we have to abide by is requiring department heads to provide and work on their budget estimates. It is not a process that is top down. It does not come from the mayor or the finance team, but is worked on by each individual department and then compiled and collaborated in conjunction with each other. There are two large portions of the budget development. The first one is estimating level service costs. So this is really answering the question of to provide the same level of services to constituents, to the residents of Somerville in next year's budget, what will the spend be? We are looking at cost increases, economic trends, pay raises, and other factors. And this happens in February and March. Once we know the new costs to deliver our existing services to residents, then we can look at increasing the number of services and programs through program improvements. And this is saying now with additional revenue, what more can we do? This is based on feedback and plans that are developed throughout the year. And this includes new staff needs, as well as for things such as supplies, consultants, external experts on particular topics in order to make those programs a reality. This happens in the April and May timeframe. And because we have a balanced budget, more additional revenue means we get to do more additional programs. Thanks, Mike. Here's a timeline of the entire calendar year. I will note that when we refer to a fiscal year, our fiscal year starts on July 1st. And so we are looking to get a new budget in place before that new year turns over. So we kick off our budget process in January, reminding folks of resources, values, goals that we're working on. And they develop their existing budgets. We talk about new programs. Some things you'll see on here that are new implemented by the Ballantyne administration are, you'll see this workshop, new this year, as well as last year, a more formal inclusion of the city councilors. They will all individually submit their budget priorities on what they would like to see in the budget. And then we'll talk more, but tomorrow night, they will convene all together and determine their final, as a group, consensus. In April, we'll get some final revenues, and then we know what our level of expenditures can be, because we are required to have a balanced budget where revenues equal expenditures. We can finalize what new programs we will be funding, and the budget will be submitted near the end of May, typically before Memorial Day. June is a very busy month. In June, throughout the month of June, over about 3 weeks, each of the department heads will come before the Finance Committee, which is comprised of 5 of the city councilors, 5 of the 12, and they will present their budget. Because we have many departments to get through each night of these budget hearings, they will focus largely on the changes from last year's budget, progress on goals, and there'll be time for counselors to ask questions. If you've tuned into these before, you will know that they are very long meetings, sometimes upwards of 5 hours, as we have many more departments to cover than in previous years, and especially compared to a decade ago. And another way we've streamlined this process last year is having counselors pre-submit questions for department heads to answer in writing. You will also find these on the budget websites to review. Once all of those hearings are done, counselors will have one cut night where they are allowed by Massachusetts law to propose a cut to the expenditures if there's something that they don't want to see funded. Then any tweaks will be made and it will be approved by City Council. Our new fiscal year begins on July 1st. Then, as we mentioned, the capital plan will be developed throughout the fall timeframe. And in November, the tax rate is set and our final budget goes to the Department of Revenue for Massachusetts. In this portion of the presentation, we'll go through resources. You may find it helpful to click these links or bookmark them for later to visit more in depth.
And Megan, this presentation is going to be on the budget website, am I right?
Yes, so you will find it there later for reference. Where to go from here? We'll go through each of these four individually, but I would start at the top. So reading through the budget on your own for departments that may interest you, if you want to review the strategic plans that the city has already set. If you're interested in the council priorities, that meeting is tomorrow. The fiscal year 24 budget, a lot of those items will happen in June, and you'll see it published online the end of May. And then we'll talk about participatory budgeting. So here's how to access the fiscal year 23 budget. This is the fiscal year that started on July 1st, 2022. And you can find it at somervillema.gov/FY23 budget. You'll see something on there, an icon similar to this that says budget book. You'll click there and you'll be presented with this initial menu. In the introduction dropdown, you will see the strategic plans that we've talked, Summer Vision 2040, Somerville Climate Forward, the message from the mayor. In the budget overview tab, you will see revenues as a whole and broken down, and a separate tab for expenditures broken down. But where you might want to spend a lot of your time, where I feel folks will likely be most interested in, is the drop down for departmental budgets. You'll see lots there. And if it is a department that has sub-departments within it, we sometimes refer to as divisions, you'll see an arrow denoting that there's further to dive into. The appendices contain other financial policies and a full staff listing, and the 5-year capital improvement plan is farthest on the right. This is an example for the department that Mike and I are in, auditing. It is a division of finance department. Each department page will contain 5 sections. The department mission, which will give a brief explanation of what they do and the services they provide to the city. You'll see this expenditure summary graph, the historical view of their budget, what was budgeted, and in the darker green, what was spent. You will see their goals for the year, as well as the snapshot I've included here, which is their updates on the goals they had for the current year and where they stand on delivering those goals. On the next slide, we'll look through the line item budget. And then you will see a staff listing for each of the positions in that department. Here is where we see the budget. You can see the top half is personnel services, which is the cost of having staff. We've got salaries as well as other additional pay items, depending on what union they may be a part of, and other benefits. And below that, we'll see ordinary maintenance, which is the cost to provide supplies, external services, and other things we've mentioned, such as concrete. We'll see care of trees, which is the cost to plant trees in the city. That's where we'll find the electricity and gas to maintain all the city buildings, and other lines as are relevant to the department. A common line you will see, Mike, if you can go back, a common line you will see in most departments will be professional and technical services. This is the line where we will find any third-party supplier that the city needs. So when we need to hire an external consultant, we gave an example of an engineer with a particular specialty for a project, it will be included in that line. And a separate breakdown is also provided on the budget website in support of what that is funding. Okay, now we can go to the next slide. Thank you. Here's a few ways to stay involved in how the city is listening to you. You can email budget@somervillema.gov to let us know your priorities. You can reach out to your city councilors. Their information is on this drop-down government under City Council. This is a great timing because tomorrow they will be meeting to discuss their priorities, all 12 of them. And then when we get closer to June, you may be interested in contributing in the public hearing at that moment, as well as watching the public hearings to see how this process works at the most in-depth level. To get to these meetings and any other meetings from the city, you'll take that government drop down to City Council meetings. There will be an option to follow the link for any meetings from July 2022 to the present. And for what we're talking about, you'll filter for the Finance Committee from there. Another way to get involved, which is also new for the City of Somerville and just launched last week, is participatory budgeting. This is a process that is done throughout the globe. It originated in Brazil in the 1980s and is a way to have a people's budget where residents in the community will propose and then vote on how to spend $1 million of public money in Somerville. Projects eligible for this must be one-time expenses. So things that as we think about the regular budget would fall under ordinary maintenance, costing $1 million or less, that benefit the public and can be implemented on city-owned property. So for example, we do not own the MBTA transit system, but we could do something in relation to a bus shelter. Idea submission is open now through May 20th. And over the summer, we will have volunteers review all the submissions, presenting a final ballot to the public of 20 ideas that they think are the most feasible to do, have the highest need within the community, and will have the greatest impact. And those we will come back and ask the public to vote on from September 13th to October 13th. In the 8 days that we've had this website open, we have had over 400 ideas submitted by residents like yourself. And for the first time we're launching this, it has been a really pleasant surprise to see how many ideas the residents have come up with and how creative they are. The website for this, we've shortened so as to not be misspelled, since participatory budgeting is a very long term. The website is www.somervillema.gov/PB. And now I will pass it back to Mike to lead our Q&A session, as well as listening to your budget priorities. We'll start by putting them in. We'll start with the questions submitted through Q&A and then go through anything in the chat as well.
Thanks, Megan. So we do have a couple questions in the Q&A feature. If you've got questions to ask, please share them there. If you've got questions, relevant questions would include things about the budget itself, how we develop it, how to read it. And then following that, we can move on to listening to your priorities, information that we can take notes on, share with the mayor and relevant departments as they're building their budget. I'd also I would love to hear from folks either tonight or at budget@somervillema.gov, our email address, what information you'd like to see with the budget. So with that, we can go through to the Q&A. We've got Spencer asking for a request for a feasibility study for a community center. Looking at covering needs like resources, like access to resources and socializing. Spencer, thanks for that question. One of the investments that was in the recently proposed capital investment plan is, a fair bit of money for a community center. This is something Mayor Ballantyne is really, really passionate about getting done. And I think that process basically begins now that we've shared that in the capital investment plan. So I think you'll be happy to hear that progress, and I think that that would be a project that we'd love to have you get involved in. Are the interpreters able to translate this question in Q&A? Can you guys see that?
Yes, Kenya should be able to see that question.
Okay, cool.
Yes.
Can you? While we're waiting on that, I'll move to the next one. Is there a way, Kenya, if you could just share with me that that question. Someone's asking, is there a way to see which are the specific programs that each department spends part of their budget on? They've tried to look for that for housing projects and can't find it. If I understand your question, so say, for example, the Office of Housing Stability has a whole budget and you're interested in what they're going to spend that money on. So the best place to look for that is on the departmental page with the goals and objectives for the coming fiscal year, right? That is there to show basically what residents are buying with the money that we're requesting, right? The other place to look, Megan mentioned the professional and technical services line. In some departments that are working on kind of complicated or specialized projects, they will show the breakdown of what they're using that money for. Sometimes it's by individual project, sometimes it's by purpose, but I think that's probably the best place to look for that.
So Mike, I actually know this question in Spanish. They're asking if these slides would be published in other languages.
They will, yes. Thank you. The slides will be published in other languages. We're going to post them at somervillema.gov/budget, along with the recording of this video. So thank you for asking that. So we've got someone asking, what categories do affordable housing and rental assistance expenditures, including the Office of Housing Stability, fall under? So the Office of Housing Stability is a division of our city's Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development. Not only do we have the Office of Housing Stability, we have the Office of Housing. So all those expenditures would be within that department and division. What I'll add, and without getting too complicated on answering this question about affordable housing and rental assistance expenditures, those there's some really, really big projects that the Office of Housing Stability has been developing and rolling out in the last 2 years since we received the American Rescue Plan Act funds, commonly referred to as ARPA. So that would be an example of special revenue, which is what we talked, if you can remember all the way back in the beginning. That's money that's basically a grant for a specific purpose. So they're utilizing that money as well. So the ecosystem of projects and funds is greater than just the operating budget. And that's a perfect example where, affordable housing, rental assistance programs are funded through ARPA as opposed to on the general fund budget. Part of the reason for that is, one, we have the resources there. Two, those funds are less restricted than money on the general fund. What I mean by that is we can do things with those funds that we otherwise could not do with regular revenue. Can you give some examples of what falls under Health and Human Services? So our Health and Human Services department is comprised of, I think, four different divisions. The first is Health and Human Services proper. In there, you've got the Office of Food Security, you've got a group of social workers, you've got some public health nurses, folks like that. And then under Health and Human Services, there's also the Council on Aging, who works very closely with our senior community. Also, Summer Promise, who works closely with our out of school time and school age children, those types of programs. And also our Veterans Services Department, who focus on the veterans of the city. So when we say Health and Human Services, we're typically referring to that grouping of 4 departments / divisions. That's the last question in Q&A. If anybody else has questions, I'm happy to answer them, or happy to share some with Megan. We'll give that just a moment here. And then what we can do is, if anybody wants to join us, we can unmute. If you want to raise your hand, we can move into a what we're calling a listening session, where we'd love to hear from you about what you think is important, what you want us to share with departments, with the mayor. And we just got one last question. Where does the budget for Somerville Police fall under? Somerville Police falls within the public safety grouping of departments. The Somerville Police Department is its own department. And underneath that is the animal control and E91 emergency 911 budgets. So we've got kind of all of those in that grouping. Here, Megan, I'll let you take this one. If someone's got questions, concerns, suggestions for the budget, should they reach out to their city councilor? Is there anywhere else to go?
Yes, definitely reach out to your city councilor for your ward, as well as the at-large councilors. You can also let us know, and we'll compile all priorities received from the public. These are things sent to budget@somervillema.gov. And if you have suggestions that would be fit for participatory budgeting, you can submit them on that website, somervillema.gov/PB. And those are the venues where you can share those.
Hey, we've got another question here. I'll read it. Somerville used to have a requirement that at least 30% of free cash, which were basically extra unspent budget and revenue beyond what was expected. So Somerville used to have a requirement that at least 30% of free cash be placed into the capital investment program. Why did that change to 50% this year? Why not do what Arlington does and just put half the free cash into next year's operating budget? So Great question. Without getting into too much detail and losing everyone, I think what I can say is that the city recently updated its free cash policy. Basically, at the end of each fiscal year, we've got leftover money that was unspent, revenue that came in beyond what we expected, and the Department of Revenue recommends that we use that for one-time expenditures, things like the capital plan, things like emergencies, things like putting that money into reserves. Different communities do different things with that money, but typically, when I've talked to any municipal finance official in our neighboring communities, they pretty much follow those three guidelines. Some communities, especially those that might be having financial shortfalls, sometimes will use free cash to fund the following year's operating budget. And again, without going too deep, that can be a useful temporary thing to do, but on an ongoing basis, using this revenue source that is non-recurring, which by that I mean, you're never clear about how much free cash you're going to have. Using that to fund your operating budget can cause potential issues, but as recently as I think about 5 years ago, Somerville was using a bit of free cash to fund our operating budget. I think it was at one point it was as high as 6 million. Right now, we've actually slowly brought that down to $0, which lets us use it to save money for the future or fund capital projects or things like that. So yeah, different communities do it different ways, and that's the way that we've updated the policy. I think what we've learned as an administration is that there are a nearly infinite number of needs in Somerville, whether it's buildings, streets, sidewalks, subsurface infrastructure, HVAC, like ventilation improvements, money for affordable housing programs, money for social workers. I think, as much as we can use that free cash to fund those priorities, the better off we'll be. So thank you for that question. I don't see any more open questions. If anyone wants to raise their hand to either ask a question or share a minute or two of comments, we're happy to, again, take notes or answer any questions that you have. You can do that by raising your hand on Zoom or pressing *6 if you're on your phone. We'll give it a minute or two here. Okay, we've got a CAS organizing program. I'm gonna give you the microphone here. You should be able to unmute now.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Sam. Yeah, I work for the Community Action Agency of Somerville. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this presentation. I found it really helpful. And I was wondering if you could go back to the slide that divides up, I think it's by department, where we saw HHS and others. Okay, yeah. Okay, public safety. I guess I just wanted to share from my personal perspective that I was just kind of shocked to see how small the HHS line was, given just the needs, that exist in Somerville. And my personal urging for the mayor would be to beef up that section some more. There's a lot, we know there's so many unmet needs, especially related to obviously affordable housing, which many argue is the #1 crisis in Somerville right now. So I just wanted to highlight that. And I really appreciate you laying this all out for us so that we can get a better picture.
Thank you. Looks like we get another question. Is it correct to assume that most of the programs are funded outside of the budget because of the limitations the state puts on it? For this attendee, I'm gonna guess you're responding to when I was talking about the American Rescue Plan Act. A lot of our housing stabilization, housing affordability programs are funded through grants, whether they're from the federal government or outside agencies, specifically because of the limitations that the state puts on our general fund revenue. We have what's called the well, I won't get into it, but our funds are very restricted of what we can spend them on. Okay, anyone else have any comments, questions, thoughts? I don't see any. So with that, I do want to say thank you for spending time with us tonight. Thank you especially to our two interpreters, as well as Courtney, who I think is still here with us for helping get Megan and I on board. And I will say, oh, something just came up with Q&A, or is that the old one? Oh, thank you. You're welcome. Again, if you've got questions, if you've got thoughts, if you want to have a conversation with us, please email us at, where is it? Well, budget@somervillema.gov. Here we go. Budget@somervillema.gov. I think this has been fun, and we'll be posting this recording to the somervillema.gov/budget website. Thanks again, everyone. And thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thanks. All right, thank you all so much. And congratulations on your work.